Okay, we're on to part two of War Photographer by Caroline Duffy. We'll just read it through again so you're familiarising yourself with the poem. Remember that you've got copies of the poem in your anthology if you've taken an anthology home. You've also got a copy of the poem on the O drive where it's saved, and there's a contextual bit of information for War Photographer too. All of the poems are saved on there in the different folders. War Photographer. In his dark room he is finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church and he a priest preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. We're going to look at the middle 2 stanzas in this section. So he has a job to do. Like all of the best images in any poem, we need to be looking for images that have 2 different readings, and we think about he has a job to do. Let's look at it on its most literal level. He has a job to do. At this moment he's back in his dark room, remember, and the job he has to do is to prepare his photographs, to take them from those spools of film and actually publish them, to get them processed, to get them developed in order to have them as physical photographs. So that's the job he's got to do immediately, but it's got a deeper meaning, hasn't it? He has a job to do. What is his deeper job? What is his significance? What's his career? Well, the career is that he's got to go out and take those photographs. He has a job to do. Maybe this image is this man reminding himself as what he's got to do, because he's got to go out there all the time, hasn't he, and witness all of that suffering, all of that devastation, all of that bombing and death, and that's what he's surrounded by day in, day out. Maybe that's him reminding himself that he must go and do that. His job is important. It's vital what he has to do in order to make governments aware, to put pressure on through the newspapers, through the supplements. And we've got that caesura there as well. He has a job to do. Again, that's that pause, that idea he must stop before thinking about getting on with this job, before carrying on with the process of developing those photographs, carrying on with the process of making the public aware of these conflicts around the globe. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Have a look at this. Hands which did not tremble then, those seem to now. If you look at the poem Remains is a poem about post-traumatic stress disorder of the soldier who goes out to Afghanistan. Equally, there's the sense here that this photographer is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And although he's not actually involved in the conflict himself, it's what he witnesses that causes that trauma, that causes that stress, that causes his hands to tremble. Why did they not tremble then? Well, that's the element of professionalism. He's got a job to do, remember. And he goes out in order to do that job and doesn't worry about it at the time. When he's back in the safety of his own home, in the safety of rural England, actually, that's when his mind starts playing tricks with him. That's when his mind goes back to everything that he's seen, everything that he's witnessed, all those people whose lives are suffering, all those people who he's seen die, get injured, be affected by the devastation overseas. So you've got a juxtaposition then, did not tremble then, those seem to now. That juxtaposition between the stress of the time and the relative comfort now, which ironically, it's now when he's safe that he feels that stress, because he has a job to do. And it goes back to that neat first sentence and the caesura at the start of this stanza. Rural England. And again, we've got that very short 2-word sentence, rural England. Again, maybe this is the poet reminding himself that This is where he should feel safe. This is where he should be away from that stress. But all those photographs, all those memories, all of that trouble comes back and haunts him as he starts to develop these photos, because the photos are going to remind him of everything that he's seen over the past weeks, past months in the war zones across the world. Home again, to ordinary pain which simple weather can dispel. We have to think about what our lives are like, don't we? We don't often give ourselves time to think about what it must be like living in parts of the world where there's extreme conflict and extreme trouble. He has to do that all the time, and his life is a juxtaposition between the conflict he witnesses and the home. Now he's thinking about what people's troubles are. It's like the first world problems, isn't it? We don't really have massive issues compared to what other people have to witness and what he's witnessed other people witnessing. And really, it's issues of things like the weather that Caroline Duffy refers to at this point. Simple weather can dispel. Dispel means to get rid of them. So the problems that even the weather can just get rid of, they're transient, they're superficial, they're not really problematic compared to everything that he's witnessed in his conflict reporting and his photography. To fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Now we've got a rhyming couplet at the end of each of the stanzas, and rhyming couplets tell us of images that need to be paired together. In this case, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat, it's reminiscent of a very famous photograph of the Vietnam conflict, where in the background you've got a napalm explosion, and you've got children running away from that. Their clothes have been burnt away from them. It's an image of pure hell itself. And this is what a war photographer has captured. This is what his job is, to capture that extreme suffering. And he's thinking about this juxtaposition all the time between his safety and between the nightmare that is described in this particular poem. And of course the fields exploding beneath the feet is an idea, an image connected with landmines, perhaps connected with bombs, with napalm attacks that unfortunately are all too frequent around the world. Something is happening. Again, Caroline Duffy uses a lot of these short sentences to add in pause, to add in reflection, to take us from the world of the conflict back to the rural England world where these photographs are developing at the time. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. Now we need to think back to our context here and to how photography used to be before we had mobile phones and digital cameras. And what used to happen was that you had to take out your spools of film, referenced in the first stanza of course, take out the spools of film, expose the film itself in the dark in that soft red light, and use a solution of chemicals to make the images appear on photographic paper. And the way the images appear are blurry at first. Bit by bit they start to become clearer, start to become sharper. So this image that we've got, the half-formed ghost, our key quote for this particular part, is another metaphor, the half-formed ghost. Literally, it's the image appearing at first as if it's quite blurry. So it looks ghostly. If we think of a ghost, we'd have blurred edges, we'd have transparency, wouldn't we? We'd be able to see through the ghost. And at this point, the picture of whoever it is on the photograph is quite blurry, quite merged with its background. But bit by bit it starts to develop. So the half-formed ghost, this picture isn't developed yet on a literal level. But we can't ignore the fact that a ghost has connotations of death. And what we might think on a deeper level is that whoever it is who's appearing on this photograph perhaps has passed away, perhaps has died in this conflict. And over the next couple of lines, we've got the story of how the war photographer has had to ask for permission to take this photograph without words. There's a language barrier there, but you can't intrude on a person's private grief. So they've tried to take that photograph with gestures, with raised eyebrows, with perhaps a smile or a facial expression of condolence, to take the photograph that he must take to try and stop the wider conflict. And so somehow he's managed to get hold of the permission to take this photograph of a dying citizen, maybe a soldier, maybe a more innocent victim, maybe a child, and in this case, it's the wife of somebody who's been killed in the conflict, and we've got these horrific images of the cries of this man's wife. And we can only imagine the horrors that she's had to face, and the horrors that he too is witnessing and reliving now as the ghost appears before his eyes. So the half-formed ghost could be the image, it could be the connotations that perhaps this man has now died, but also it's a memory, isn't it? And ghosts, shadows, spectres are memories that we have, and every single photograph that this man has taken is a memory of his witnessing of conflict, of death. And maybe that's something he tries to suppress, because we've already had those images of his hands trembling because of the stress that he suffered, but he can't suppress them, because with every photograph that's developed, it's another horrific memory for him. It's another terrifying image of the wars that he's had to witness. So a really interesting quote that can be looked at in a number of ways. And again, you've got the literal and the metaphorical reading of those particular images. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. There's a lot of words from the lexical field of conflict here. We've got the cries, we've got the ghost, we've got the stranger, but we've also got the blood stained into foreign dust. It's very reminiscent of some of the imagery in Simon Armitage's poem Remains, which we'll come on to at a different point. But the idea of blood seeping into the dust is pretty horrific, isn't it? Somebody's life draining away that this photographer has to witness all the time. And it links back again to the start of that second stanza. He has a job to do, and if we keep coming back to that with every single horrific image that Carol Ann Duffy exposes us to and this photographer has taken, we have to remember the purpose of this man's job. He has to witness these dreadful things. He has to get evidence of these dreadful things so that the public sees them, and the public then can put pressure on the governments. Governments can then put pressure on other governments in order to bring about the cease of these particular conflicts. So just to conclude very quickly for this part, he has a job to do, that simple sentence. We've got to keep coming back to that. That is so central to the poem and its meaning, really. It's right at the heart of the poem, both structurally and metaphorically, because it's what we have to keep coming back to. There's a reason why he has to take these photographs. We've got the hands which did not tremble then, though seem to now. The idea of that post-traumatic stress disorder, which ironically he suffers back at home, where he seemed to manage in the conflict zones. And finally, the half-formed ghost, the connotations of death, the image appearing quite blurred, and that memory that he's trying to black out.